الحمد لله رب السماوات ورب الأرض رب العالمين وله الكبرياء في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. الحمد لله الذي بنعمته تتم الصالحات وفلك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. صلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيد الأولين والآخرين محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له الملك الحق المبين، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه من خلقه وخليله وأمين روحه. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. My dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, all praise and glory and thanks are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We come on this blessed day of Friday to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all that He has given us and then to renew our pledge and our commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The pledge and the commitment that we made when we decided to be Muslim. It's a pledge with Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to honor all our contracts. Honor all your commitments and your responsibilities. And on top of them comes our commitment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran calls it ahd and mithaq. الذين يوفون بعهد الله ولا ينقضون الميثاق. Those who honor their covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, also we come to remind ourselves of Allah and remind ourselves to actively serve Him and actively prepare to meet Him on that big day. يوم لا ينفع مال ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم. You want to reach that day, you want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while you are in a position to say that I did everything I can. Oh Allah, I did not spare any effort to serve, to do your work and to execute your plan and to understand that plan and fulfill it to the best of my ability. Speaking about the ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, مَا بِكُم مِّن نِعْمَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. Anything good that is happening in your life is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yesterday I was talking to brother, he's a physician, alhamdulillah, very successful. But he mentioned something to me that I thought probably share it with you. That he specialized in a field that is not very diverse, not very inclusive or very open for minorities. So after he graduated, it wasn't easy for him to get a fellowship. So for a while it was like a hopeless situation. He said, what put him on track, there are 6 or 7 or even 8 incidents that happens like coincidence. Maybe at that time he thought coincidence. Now he knows that's a result from Allah. That 6 or 7 or even, as I said, 8 things happened so that he was put on track and then he tried. Imagine that's why Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he addressed his people, he said, فَابْتَغُوا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الرِّزْقِ. Seek your provision from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't mean that you don't work hard. No, you do. But that's not enough. Working hard and keeping always your trust, because there are other people who may work harder than you and didn't get what you are getting. So make sure that you get used to thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything. Started from the moment you wake up and you find yourself alive and healthy and your family. That's a huge blessing that you should start your day with thankfulness and gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, we're going to start today, inshallah, a series of trying to understand where we are, how did we come to this point, and where do we go from here? Because it's not acceptable. We can accept our situation and deal with it or adapt to it. But if you read the Quran properly, you know that's not where we belong. That's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be. That's not where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be. So it goes without saying that we are nowhere close to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be. Nowhere. And we are nowhere close to the Quranic description of the community of believers. Quran describes the community of believers as khayra ummah, as ummah wasat, ummah that who leads and guides and provides the example, and it's a community of difference makers, community that has an impact and make a difference and make its presence felt. We are nowhere close to the role and states that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designated for us. The state or the ranking that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designated for us, again, we are nowhere close. Now there are two verses in Quran that tell us where we are supposed to be, where we Muslims are supposed to be. Two verses, I'm not sure they are taking the attention that they deserve. One in Surah Al-Baqarah and one in Surah Al-Hajj. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 143. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا. Verse 143, Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have made you into a just community, a model community, a leading community. All of these can be translation of Ummah al-Wasat. Why? So that you may bear witness to the truth before others. Pay attention to this. And so that the messenger may bear witness to it, to the truth before you. So what this verse is saying? It's saying that Allah selected you to do what? To be among other nations, like the Prophet was amongst you. تكونوا شهداء على الناس ويكون الرسول عليكم شهيدا. So look at the role that the Rasul fulfilled. And that's exactly the role that you should fulfill as an individual and we should fulfill as a community. لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ. That's the purpose. So we made you into just or balanced or leading or model community so that you may bear witness to the truth before others, and so that the messenger may bear witness to the truth before you. It's an amazing. What was the role of Rasul among us? He's a role model. We're supposed to be role models. He was a mercy to humanity. We are supposed to be mercy to the people around us, both as individuals and as a community. He was a leader of the community. We are supposed to be leading. We're expected. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. That's where Allah wants us to be, and that's what will make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pleased with us. Nothing short of that. And that's another big mistake that we commit. We think that's an option. This assignment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that role, Allah invited us to be in that position. We think that it's optional. It's not optional. We're going to have to do our best to be there, because that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us to be. That's what will make Him pleased with us. The other verse is at the end of Surah Al-Hajj, the same meaning, confirmed again. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اركعوا واسجدوا واعبدوا ربكم وافعلوا الخير لعلكم تفلحون وجاهدوا في الله حق جهاده هو اجتباكم وما جعل عليكم في الدين من حرج ملة أبيكم إبراهيم وسماكم مسلمين من قبل وفي هذا ليكون ويكون الرسول شهيدا عليكم وتكونوا شهداء على الناس. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Surah Al-Hajj, verse 78, 77 and 78. Believers, bow down, ruku'. Prostrate yourself, sujood. Worship your Lord, ibadah. And do good, so that you may succeed. That's it? No. In doing all of this, strive hard. You need to do your utmost in all of these, doing good and worshiping, and strive hard for Allah as is His due. He has chosen you. هو اجتباكم. And when we say that we're the chosen people, but with the proper meaning. Now we were chosen for mission. We were chosen for status. هو اجتباكم. This is an offer from Allah. It's an order, it's a commandment, and it is an offer from Allah that we cannot afford to decline. هو اجتباكم. He has chosen you and placed no hardship in your religion. The faith of your father Ibrahim, Allah has called you Muslims, both in the past and in this message, so that always when you read Quran, pay attention to so that, because that's the purpose of Allah. So that li yakuna or li asa, all of these are to mention the purpose of Allah and the expectation from you, so that the messenger can bear witness about you, and so that you can bear witness about other people. Very clear, crystal clear, that Allah chosen you for the status to be among other nations, like the Prophet was amongst you. So it is not optional, and this situation should not be accepted by any means. It's not a choice. That's number one. It's not a choice to close this gap between where we are and where we're supposed to be. Number one. Number two, we can, with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, close this gap. So first, it is not optional, but also it is doable. And we have to believe in that. We have to refuse this situation and believe that we can, and inshallah, and we should close that gap and spare no effort to close that gap and accept the offer from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Accept the offer, huwa ijtabakum. He's offering you this honor and this responsibility. Why it is not optional? Because that's the only way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be pleased with us. At least we are trying. We may not get there, it may take more than one generation, but at least we are working hard to close the gap between this status that is described in the Quran and this very dire situation in which Muslims are. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. So it's doable because Allah promised that if we try, He's going to help us. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those who are striving will guide them. وَلَيَنْصُرَنَّ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَنْصُرَهُ. There is a promise there. There is a promise from Allah that He will help those who are trying to close this gap, those who are serving the cause of Allah and trying to be the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants them to be. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised to help. Why it is doable? Because we are no less than the people who did it. There are many nations and many countries and societies, they were in much worse condition than Muslim society. And now they bypass them by light years. And the list is getting longer. More and more countries are jumping. They have nothing special that Muslims do not have. Nothing. Actually, if you compare, the situation of Muslims is much better. The opportunity for Muslims is much greater for them to create success story. Yet it's not happening. So it is doable. Why? Number one, because Allah promised to help those who are trying. And number two, because other people have done it. And number three, because we have a great, inspiring and empowering religion that produced a great success story in the most unfavorable conditions that you can think of. There is no more successful movement in history than the prophetic movement. The movement that Rasulullah has built and led that community. So we're not talking about theory. We're talking about something that happened in much worse conditions. Small number of people, illiterate, poor, in the desert, tribal societies, fighting each other all the time. And then this religion bring them and make them ummah wasat and shuhada ala nas and leaders and models. Do you think that was meant to be one-time event? Absolutely not. That was meant to be a model for us, and that's why we need, when we talk about Sunnah of Rasulullah, we have to be careful. Sunnah of Rasulullah, it's much bigger than the Hadith. Sunnah of Rasulullah is his methodology. Sunnah means tariqah, approach. My methodology, my model. There is a successful model that we have to understand so that we can implement it properly to produce similar results. And keep in mind that anything that happened at the time of Rasulullah, it happened through human efforts, not miracles. Let's not deceive ourselves to say, no, he was a prophet, Allah made it easy for him. It was not easy. Or these are companions, they are special people. They're not. It's this deen that made them special people. They were not born special people or Superman. It's this religion that is available for us that made them, transform them into those great individuals that we know. And everything happened, and we can go on and on with evidence that everything that happened at the time of Rasulullah was through human effort. Not miracles, and it was not easy. But there was a model, there was a discipline, there was elements of success in that model that we have to dissect and implement them. Number one, we want to fix this situation if we are serious about closing the gap and accepting the fact that number one, it's not optional, it's a must, and number two, it's doable. It's doable that we regain the position that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen. Huwa ijtabakum, remember, has chosen you. Number one, we have to accept the facts, the reality, and accept the responsibility for it. Nothing is going to happen without seeing the reality as is. Now we are in a very bad situation. And most of the time it's getting worse every day. Just look at the Muslim map, and look what's going on in different countries. With every year, a new crisis. Last year there was no Sudan, but etc. Always. So we have to accept that. Accept it doesn't mean that normal, no. But confront it. See it as is. Because that's what the Quran teaches us. And accept the responsibility. And we are in this situation. It's the work of our own hands. فَبِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِيكُمْ قُلْ هُوَ مِنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِكُمْ. It's very clear, Quran. So first, see it as is. The numbers do not lie. And statistics are very embarrassing when it comes to Muslims, when it is education or science, or it's very shameful. Or the level of reading and some even moral, akhlaq, scales, we are not there. We are not among the best. Accepting, seeing it as is. Does this mean that we have to
give up or to be hopeless. No, we're not. We shouldn't. Why? Because remember, it's doable. It is doable. That's why I started by emphasizing that, so that you don't think that when we talk about how bad the situation is, that we're talking about something that is hopeless. No. It's a must, and it is doable. We should and we can, bi'idhnillah, close this gap and turn things around. So with this, we can close the doors of denial. Denial is looking the other way. It makes you comfortable, but it doesn't help. Close the door of denial. Close the door of justification. I will become expert in justifying failure. Sit down and just find excuses. Or find somebody to blame. Just put it on somebody else. We close all these doors. It's a very sad reality, and we are responsible for it. Generation after generation, we are responsible for what happened. Because that's what Quran tells us. أولما أصابتكم مصيبة قد أصبتم مثلها قلتم أن هذا. How come this happened? قل هو من عند أنفسكم. Quran says you only have yourself to blame. So don't look around, just look inside. That should be the first thing. Without crossing this step, all the rest is meaningless. Because if you're going to continue with denial, inkar. You tell somebody that I think you have this serious health issue. No, I'm okay. I'm fine. It was a simple cold. Okay. But that's not going to get you anywhere. That's denial. They call it denial. It's not going to help. Or justifying. Excuses. We are victims and they conspire, etc. Finding excuses for what happened, or find scapegoat, somebody to blame. All of these have to be put aside. And by the way, that's not only as a community, but also even in your personal life and your family life. You should really take these off the table. These approaches are very futile. They lead nowhere. Blame game, excuses, justification, scapegoating, denial, all of them. They make you comfortable, but they lead nowhere. If we pass this step, then there is a big challenge in front of us, which is to understand why we ended up in this predicament. Diagnosis, tashkhis. There is no treatment without proper diagnosis. If your doctor doesn't have the right diagnosis, they can prescribe medicine, but they're not going to help you. Why? Because the diagnosis was not right. So diagnosis is critical to understand, and unfortunately, time and again, either we don't do this, or we do it in a very superficial way. We don't get to the bottom of the problem, to the root causes. So we deal with the symptoms. But the problem does not go away. Why? Because we did not tackle the root cause of the problem. So, understand why, and that's what we're going to start with. Of course, eventually, should be talking about how we can rebound, how we can turn things around. But we shouldn't rush, because people sometimes they don't like this discussion. Say, just move, give us solutions. No, let's be brave and patient first to understand the problem. There is Einstein was said one time that I spend 90% of the problem, 90% of the time try to understand the problem, 10% of the time to solve it. Because if I understand it, I will solve it. So 90% of the time to understand the problem, 10% of the time to solve it. And a lot of time we say, let's go to solution quickly, or give us a solution. Without accepting the facts and the responsibility, and without the proper diagnosis, we are going nowhere. Even when we try to change things and fix the situation or the crisis, it doesn't get fixed. Examples were very recent. The Arab Spring. It was an attempt to fix the problem. It did not fix it. Why? There was a very serious deficiency in the diagnosis. Our problem is not only dictatorship. Dictatorship is the tip of the iceberg. Dictatorship, there is some root causes that resulted in that dictatorship. So we were under the impression that if dictatorship is gone, things is going to work out. It didn't. Before that, the wrong diagnosis. For decades, we thought our problem is that Muslims have abandoned Islam. And we define that as because they are not praying. They are not in the masjid. They are women, they are not wearing hijab. People are drinking. Okay, so what's the solution? Solution, bring them to the masjid and have them to pray. And let women wear hijab. And those who drink will stop. All right? It happened. All of this happened in the last few decades. Mosques became full. Alhamdulillah, Islamic appearances are everywhere. Islamic literatures, Islamic channels, Islamic social channels, you name it. Nothing has changed. Why? Again, there was a problem in the diagnosis. People did not abandon the Islam because they are not praying anymore. People abandoned the heart of Islam, the mission of Islam, the Islam that was preached by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when we brought them back only to the sha'air, we did not fix the hearts and the minds of people. So the same person with the same mindset, but now he's praying and he's not drinking anymore. But the way they behave at home, at work, it's the same person. Not much changed. And that's why nothing has changed. Again, another failure in the diagnosis or having very superficial. Yes, it's a problem that people abandon Islam. But it is not just by bringing them back to pray or put hijab on the heads of women that we're going to fix problems. No, there is a damage here. And there is a damage in the personality. We're going to talk about how that damage happened over the centuries. Another example, when Muslim countries were occupied, people thought that the problem is occupation. So if we rally and push the colonizer or occupation army out of the country, things will work out. But it happened. And there was great work and sacrifices by people. And it was a great success story. Each country, they had great success stories in pushing out and liberating their lands. But what happened after that? They found themselves ruled by the oppressive and corrupt regimes. Why? Once again, occupation was the tip of the iceberg. There was something, as Malik ibn Nabi rahimahullah says, there is qabiliyya lil-istimar. Why you were occupied to begin with? Because you were weak. And therefore, without fixing that weakness, pushing out the occupation is not going to help. So you can see 3 times. One is bringing people to Islam and nothing has happened because we brought them to very superficial Islam. We added Islam on top of the damage that was there in the akhlaq and in the behavior and the mindset of people. We didn't clean the wound before closing it. We closed the wound before cleaning it. And then occupation is the problem. Occupation is gone, nothing happened. Dictatorship is the problem. Dictator is gone and nothing happened. Again, that shows you the importance of having the proper diagnosis. I'm going to start mentioning this, and inshallah we'll continue in the future if we have a chance. Now, if we go to the deep roots, way back in history, this situation that you see is the product of 2 major turning points in the history of Muslims. And until now, we are yet to tackle those problems that emerged from that moment. As you know, there was a very bloody civil war among Muslims. They called it Fitna al-Kubra. 2 major wars. tens of thousands of lives. Now, this requires a different discussion why it happened. But as a result, because people were so shocked to see Muslims fighting each other, they never thought this was going to happen. People start longing and yearning and looking for stability at any cost, at any price. Any form of stability. Whoever comes and establishes law and order is welcome. And that's very logical. And I can understand that part. If you live in a chaotic situation for a long time, and fitna and people killing each other, of course you want somebody who comes and establish law and order and stabilize things. So the problem was not in the first part. The problem was in the second part. When Muslim scholars start to issue fatwa to legitimize that type of governance, which in the fiqh is called حكم المتغلب أو المتسلط. Whoever imposes himself, we obey him. He's a legitimate leader. Doesn't give freedom, doesn't give right, he's corrupt, he's oppressive, doesn't matter. As long as he established law and order. And that was a terrible, horrible mistake that we're still suffering from it until now. Because until now, there is a good segment of Muslims who think that if the one who's in charge established law and order and some stability, we're fine. Even without freedom, without rights, without anything, we're fine. So that was a turning point, and the result of that was more than 12 centuries of absolute power that is inherited within the family. More than 12 centuries. Now we live under one man making decisions, decide to wage war. Now we talked before khutbah, the Prophet ﷺ consulting. Now this one will decide war and peace. And then the treasure, your money, he can decide how much tax he gets from you, and he managed it with no transparency and no accountability. And we accepted that for more than 12 centuries. One family goes, we go through some chaos again, and then another family comes and establishes themselves. The Umayyad goes, Abbas comes. Another family, etc. So that's the first turning point, and inshallah we'll come back in details because that has never happened. Now history is good only for lessons. We should not, but until now we're still swinging between dictatorship and chaos. And we have seen it. In our life we have seen both. We have seen countries swinging between dictatorship and chaos. Number two, another major turning point that produced this situation that you see is that Muslims, unfortunately, at certain point in time, again, all of this is done out of good intention. This idea of accepting stability, dictatorship in the name of certain people have the best of intentions. I mean, they have seen chaos, they have seen bloody wars, so they want stability. What they missed is what? They should have accepted that temporarily. And then start asking for, we need to go back to the original system. Because in the original system, at the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Umar al-Khattab and Uthman ibn Affan and Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhum jami'an, people were citizens, they were not subjects. Leaders were chosen by people, by consent. Nobody imposes himself, or because he is the son of the Khalifa. Leadership by consent, complete transparency, and complete accountability. Now all the elements of democracy were there and more. And the Rasul ﷺ in Medina established the state based on constitution and citizenship. How on earth we accept to go back to tribal and family or dynasty rule? Again, I would understand if it was accepted as temporary method. Okay, Jazakallah khairan, thank you. You did it, you established law and order for a couple of years, but now we need to transition back. It's like coup d'etat, it's like inqilab. Somebody did coup, okay, fine. Now things are stable, we want to transition back to the original system. They did it. They actually created roots in Islam, so it became very legitimate Islamically. And that's how it continued for 12 centuries. The other turning point was Muslims, again out of good intention, 2nd, 3rd century after Hijri century, they decided that whatever fiqh was developed at that time, whatever tafsir, whatever knowledge is more than enough. The madahab, that's it, we're good. So we need to freeze ijtihad. Why? Because otherwise we're going to get bid'ah. And we don't want bid'ah. We don't want deviation. So let us freeze our mind. And then we spend generations until this moment relying completely on the fiqh and books and literature that was developed in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Hijri. Which runs totally against our responsibility. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised to preserve the text and assigned us the task to contextualize it, to implement it. And it will be implemented in a different way, in different countries and different era. There are things that will not change, they're constant. But most of the religion is flexible. So rather than translating books that were written centuries ago, we should develop our own fiqh, our own ijtihad, and ijtihad should never stop. Why? Because that's the reason that will keep Islam vibrant. And why? Because the text is fixed and life is continuously evolving. How we can close that gap and keep Islam always relevant is to continuous ijtihad, to contextualize and implement the text in a different context. And we took fiqh and knowledge that was developed in a certain area, in a certain part of the world, and then we kept taking it from country to country and from century to century, and that was totally wrong. And that explained the stagnation, because when you have intellectual stagnation and political stagnation, that's what you expect. You don't expect the results better than this. Extremely important to understand the deep roots of this situation, because inshallah, that will pave the way for us to address it. Now we understand how deep the roots are and what are they. Now how can we tackle them and how we can close that gap? إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونتوب إليه نعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. But dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, of course, under oppression there is no creativity, and that's why lots of scholars were persecuted. Most of us, we don't know. Even the leaders of Madhab, the founders of Madhab were persecuted. I mean, tortured and jailed. And that applied to religious scholars and applied to scientists. Now we brag a lot of time about Muslim scientists, but many of us don't know that most of them, they were oppressed and persecuted. The great scientists in medicine and Ibn al-Haytham in optics and others, those great scientists, a lot of them, they were persecuted by this type of governments. So in a political stagnation and intellectual stagnation from those two turning points produced this situation that we are living in. We'll talk inshallah about why it lasted so long, why there was some great achievements in the history of Muslims, even with this type of governance. And again, the main issue is how we can turn things around. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم اشف مرضانا وارحم موتانا وتوفنا وتراض عنا واختم بالصالحات أعمالنا واجعل خير أعمالنا خواتمها وخير أيامنا يوم نلقاك. ربنا ارحم والدينا كما ربونا صغارا وارحم موتانا وجميع موتى المسلمين. اللهم لا تدع لنا ذنبا إلا غفرته
هذا سبحانك إنا كنا من الظالمين. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد.